Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Louis Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgout.
And this is the big Uno Dos.
The big Uno Dos, as they say in the industry, the podcast industry. So for our big 12th episode, I have some unfortunate news.
Oh, dear.
So viewers of the podcast might know from this podcast or from the other that I was Food Network's next star, the next Food Network star. Yeah. Well, now there's a new Food Network star, so I'm no longer the next Food Network star. I'm the previous Food Network star.
But then that means that you're not our celebrity host anymore.
I'm no longer a celebrity host, no longer celebrity status.
You're now the ex-celebrity host, the washed-up celebrity host.
Yeah.
I am the washed-up celebrity host of Get Recc'd.
Yes, hello, I'm your washed-up celebrity host. So now we don't have that celebrity status. Unfortunately, once you become washed up, you lose all your Twitter. All your Twitter followers, first and foremost, and also because I no longer have celebrity status, we will no longer have any celebrity guests on the podcast.
Oh man, but everybody loved it the last 5 times we did it.
I know. Remember when we had Fred Durst on the podcast?
Oh, I remember. He made sure to tell us multiple times that we had Fred Durst on our podcast in 2018.
Yeah, he was like, we were like, hello, I'm your host, Louis. I'm your host, Steven. Then he said,
Chocolate Starfish, 2018.
Yeah, and those were good times, but those are behind us now.
Sadly.
So sorry, everyone. We do what we can here, but sometimes it's not good enough. Sometimes you just have to stop. Sometimes you just have to quit.
Yeah. And speaking of quitting, I think we're quitting this intro segment.
And speaking of quitting, we're quitting this bit.
Moving on to saturation.
Yeah. That was a great transition.
Oh, before we do that, though, we have to say what the theme of the last episode was, or what the theme of this episode is. Last episode, we did a themed rec for trilogies, so this will be a little different because we've each technically were recommended 3 things, but it counts as one because we're going to sum up the trilogy as a whole by the end, and we'll begin with what I recommended to Steven, which is the rap group Brockhampton's Saturation Trilogy. And actually, before we do that, I'll put up the thing, but before we do that, I do want to quickly address that when I recommended this to Steven, this was after the Amir Van abuse controversy came out. I actually didn't know that. If I knew that, I don't know that I would have recommended this, and even if I would have said something about it. I honestly didn't know. I found out like a week later, and I thought it happened after. I was wrong. It happened before. But, that whole thing is settled now, so I don't think there's much to talk about with it, but just wanted to make sure that I made it clear that we are aware that happened. But besides that, I think that I'll let you start with the Saturation Trilogy.
Yeah, so we will talk about each individual component of our respective trilogies
and then score them and
kind of try to score them, sum them up, and then after we'll talk a little bit about the trilogy as a whole, because that's interesting as well to note, because as much as these things must stand on their own, particularly usually in the case of something being labeled a trilogy, they are made to stand together as well. In some cases, the second of the trilogy, in fact, relies on the third. I don't think that's the case in either of ours necessarily, but we'll talk about it. Okay, so I had not heard of this group before, which is, I guess, a common thing that I say here on the podcast.
You might as well. It's honestly just a given at this point. Yeah. You might as well not even.
In fact, I didn't.
Comes with the territory,
right? In fact, I didn't just say that. That was the voice sample we have of me.
A little like a Staples button.
Yeah, we have a box that we can. We have a couple of fun quotes. So this first album comes right off the gate and hits hard. In fact, I thought that that's kind of what that set expectations for not only this album but this whole trilogy, and I would say that is not the case in most situations here.
In that What do you mean? So
it was the first track, Heat, right on the start of the album, was very raw,
right.
A lot of energy, a lot of anger, and that is not necessarily their total vibe, but that was kind of what that first track led me to believe. And I think that in a way that's interesting, because then you have, just as I did, you have some expectations for what this is going to be, and it really shakes those expectations up as you go through even this album and then through the whole trilogy.
So you thought while listening to Heat that you were about to hear like a hardcore hip hop,
really, really raw, and that changes almost immediately. Honestly, you go from Heat to Gold. So for this album, I'll talk a little bit about some of the tracks that I liked. So I really like Gold a lot. I like Star. Star, I think, is an interesting one, because Star feels like one of those tracks where it's like, man, this is such an object of its time, where you go back to this track years from now and you'd be like, who are these people?
Because the entire gimmick of the song is that they're comparing themselves to stars,
to
like celebrities. And so, a lot of those celebrities are celebrities of the past, but they're all names that we at this current time at least remember. Yeah, I don't know that that'll always be the case.
Yeah, they reference Chris Paul and Blake Griffin.
And it's funny because by like Heat, Gold, and Star, the opening trilogy of this trilogy, you're right that Heat hypes you up for something that isn't exactly the vibe of the trilogy. But Gold, on the other hand, definitely is much more in line with what much of the trilogy is like, because Brockhampton it's very hard to pin them down with one genre, but most of their tracks are like pop rap, and Gold is just straight up pop rap.
Yep, for sure.
So I will say that was one thing that I don't like about the sequencing of the album, or I guess of the trilogy, because Heat is a fantastic opening track, but it as an opening track to the entire trilogy, it's definitely not exactly appropriate. But then again, I wonder what would be, right? Because they do so much throughout these three albums that I don't know. I don't know what I would have put as the opener other than Heat.
I want to say some general thoughts about, I guess this applies for the trilogy, but I'll talk about them here off the bat. Mm-hmm. I really like their group's flow. I don't know if they get to it so much in this one necessarily, but I like because their group is so large, there's a lot of variability track to track, from who's on the track, generally the vibe of the track, the flow of the track. You get some, in some instances, you do get some repetition there, and so everyone has their own voice, but you get so many different voices across the span of the trilogy and across the individual albums. I think that one thing is, I don't know if it's, one issue with listening to a trilogy of music over and over and over again is that a lot of them tend to blend. Yeah. So I'll preface that. I'm sorry if I'm talking about the wrong thing on the wrong album, but
I think that's forgivable.
In particular, one thing that I thought was especially interesting. And I don't know who is who in the group, but one of the performers in the group raps a lot about being gay. In fact, one of the songs is very much about that.
Kevin Abstract. He's probably the most famous member of the group at this point, specifically for that reason. He does most of their hooks. He doesn't actually do a ton. He doesn't have a ton of verses, which is why you really, whenever there is a verse, you really recognizes it. A lot of it is about, it's about being gay.
Which I thought was really interesting. That's not necessarily something you hear about. In fact, he even talks about how you don't hear about it.
Yeah, in hip hop, not at all. Especially not in the way that he does, because we'll get to it on the album, but he talks about being gay in much the same way that other rappers rap about being straight.
Being straight,
and
exactly.
Yet, something really interesting is if you watch reaction videos to some of the tracks where everybody's like, what, and if he had said oh, I just fucked my bitch or something, it just would have been nothing.
Right.
But because he says boyfriend, it's it completely throws everybody off.
Yeah.
And it's not even necessarily a fault of them. It's nobody, you do not hear that
in
hip hop music almost ever.
So one thing about this track, or this album has a couple of the skits. I didn't really understand the skits. I don't know if you could shed a little light on those, but
yeah, not exactly.
Well, one I didn't understand them because I don't speak Spanish that well,
yeah.
so I understood most of what they were saying, but not all of it. So in that sense, I literally didn't understand the skits, but I also didn't understand the skits in the context of the album.
Yeah, so that's Roberto. That's their member who does the skits. He's in only one song. He's in Sister Nation, he said, but other than that, I'm pretty sure he's only in the skits. And the only way I can say that they're justified is that in their music videos, he speaks Spanish, me llamo Roberto, and then he says something in Spanish to open up every single one of their music videos. And he's always doing something ridiculous, like running away from having just robbed a bank, or like, there's a bunch of crap. And so I guess that ties it into the albums, but beyond that, it's just a thing. The skits are just, yeah. They are one of the things though that most concisely tie the albums together. Beyond the sound of the records, it's that every single one has those skits. Not quite the same number, but always more than one, and they're like extremely similar.
So the other thing on this album I would talk about is we mentioned a little bit about how varied this album is, the album itself and the trilogy track to track. So I think the tracks that I enjoyed most were when they really slowed things down. On this track, there's Tupac. I thought that was a very interesting track. On others, we'll get there, but there are some others that I enjoyed that are quite similar to that. Because in general, I would say that the production value of these albums it feels very high.
Yeah.
The tracks are very clean, a lot of great hooks, a lot of great beats that they're flowing off of. And I didn't pick up on anything, but I didn't necessarily hear any samples. Is that true?
Are there no?
There might be beat samples and everything, but I didn't hear any
You mean song samples?
Like traditional pop hip hop has a lot of samples that are song samples.
Yeah, I don't believe so. Paris Mitto's in the chat here. If there is, he will say he is a super fan of this group. So
okay,
I don't believe so. Yeah, in the beats probably there's sampling going on, but yeah, like song vocal samples, I don't remember any.
So just the commendability of having these 3 tracks that are all very unique and very much to the band's strength, I think is really awesome to have listened to. So one thing, the other thing I would ask, because I didn't look it up, how much time was there between these 3 in release?
Yeah, so this one came out in May, I think, June, July. Not long, right? Because this one came out, I think, in the summer of 2017, maybe even late summer. Again, Paris, you probably know. And then Saturation 2, it was all within like the second half of last year. They all came out. And 3 came out in December. I definitely remember that. It came out like right near the end of the year. But it was not terribly long, a few months between each project. And that was it. Yeah, I actually... about this album in particular, because we have been talking a lot about the trilogy as a whole, and it's hard not to with these because they are similar, but I think that Saturation 1 in particular stands apart from the other 2, particularly because you mentioned the high production value, and it's true that they all have high production value, but I would say that this one definitely sounds the cheapest compared to 2 and 3, which sound pretty much equally expensive and produced. This one definitely, you can tell it's more like homemade. I would say and again, it still sounds very high. Like it still has very high sound quality. It sounds great, but when compared to the next 2, yeah. But I will say that in this album, I'll get it out of the way. This is my least favorite of the trilogy. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, yeah. So my issue is that I think this album opens really strong with Heat and Gold, especially Heat, which set the bar right now. That is my favorite song of the entire trilogy. Heat is amazing. Like, best rap song I heard all last year. Didn't hear a better one from last year. It just fucking blows me away. It's amazing. And as the opener of their trilogy, again, even though I'm not necessarily satisfied with how it sets your expectations, again, I don't know what I would have put there otherwise. And yeah, Gold's great as well. Gold's super catchy. I think that once you get to Tupac all the way up to like Trip, I get pretty uninterested. I find a lot of these songs, and they do a lot of pitch shifting in the vocals here where they make everybody super high pitch, like chipmunk vocals for like this entire stretch. And they do this throughout the trilogy every now and again, but on this album it seems like it's all like right in that bulk of songs they do it, and it's just, I'm not impressed. It doesn't help that Bank is one of my least favorite songs on the trilogy in general. But man, once you get like to Swim, like Swim is fantastic. Yeah, by the time you get from Cash to Waste, the entire finishing stretch of this album is fantastic.
And that's so what I would say, especially the last three. And I would put Cash in there as well, but again, the skits are like,
oh yeah, I don't really, not cutting this.
But yeah, Milk, Face, Waste.
Yeah, so
what
good.
A great way to close out the album. Yeah. And that's where it's like, you know, as I look at this album, it's like I agree with you on Heat, Gold, and Star, and it's like as I look through this album, it's like, where would I even have placed Heat? I don't really know.
Yeah, it's a great opener to the album.
Yeah,
just to the trilogy, maybe not.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's amazing. I mean, that especially like that, everybody comes in so hard on that track.
Yeah.
You know, Paris here, he one time called it this group's Bring the Ruckus, which was like the opening track on Wu-Tang's first album, and I think that's a good way to describe it, because it's like everybody just comes in and just like absolutely kills it. Every single person's verse is memorable on this track. And then you've got like the finishing touch, which shows their more experimental side, which we'll get to, which is why you can't call the group a pop rap group, because every now and again they do stuff that like is for hip hop fairly out there, not for music in general. But like at the end of this track, you've got that just super distorted, like I'm not sure what it is, but that super distorted like synth line that ends this track off. Like, it's killer.
Yeah. And just the way the track opens too, because the track opens in a similar way, right? With like some like low reverb, and then they all come in.
It just kicks off. Yeah, right. Yeah. It's fantastic. Absolutely amazing. And but again, my favorite song of the whole trilogy. So yeah, and then the final thing we should mention that I think is important, the final song, Waste, is entirely a song by the member Bareface. He sings this track, and he sings on a few other songs, but generally he's reserved for like the last track, which he always just sings the entire way through. And you'll notice.
So I would ask, we'll get there, but so he's on like Summer.
He's on Summer, and he's in the beginning of Team. Okay. Yeah, so he's the one who's singing these songs. And now this group calls themselves a boy band. I don't know if I told you that, but they say they're a boy band.
Okay.
And of course it's partially a joke, but they are considered a boy band, and at points you can actually see it. Like on these final tracks, it's like it sounds like a boy band song, like really good ones, not like what you generally think of. But yeah, Waste is super good. It always becomes essentially like a pop rock or just straight up pop tune by the end of the album, each time. And yeah, Waste is super, super good. What else do I want to talk about before we move on? I guess the last thing that I would mention is in that final stretch of the album, from like Swim to Waste, you get a lot of really emotional tracks, and you see the band's softer side, the group's softer side, which is one of the things that I think defines them. And you mentioned Kevin Abstract being openly gay, but he is not the only one who's super open with his life and his lifestyle in a way that, you know, a rap group, when a group of rappers want to come together, they don't tend to do this. You'll get individual rappers who are super personal, whatever, but this is like a whole group of people, and they're all just exposing themselves. And you really see that on the latter end of this record, which I really enjoy, especially like on Milk.
Definitely.
So yeah, final thoughts on the first Saturation?
Let's wait. I'm gonna wait to score. I'll score when we get through the end of this. I'll score each individual, and then I'll give my thoughts on the trilogy.
Okay, then I'll wait. Yeah. I'll wait too then. All right, well, let's move on to Saturation 2. Oh, and by the way, before we get to that, Paris Mento finally said Saturation 1 came out June 9th, 2 came out August 25th, and 3 came out December 15th. So really not that long.
Okay. And I saw he had responded a little bit about some samples too.
Yeah, he said they have samples, but these are like beat samples. Like none of these songs have a so you're right, I guess.
Okay, so I'm gonna start this. So although we didn't score the last one, I am gonna start this one off by saying this was my favorite of the trilogy.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that this it strikes just from start to finish. It strikes such a great balance track to track. I think that the beats on these tracks individually are really great. The flow, again, although I would say that I would commend their flow for the whole trilogy, but I just think here, like, their verses are so much more memorable, and each individual track I felt like was a lot more memorable.
Yes,
because just as you had mentioned, like, the middle of the last album, so Saturation 1, I like Tupac, I like a couple of the other ones, but for most of those tracks, I would agree, like, I just, like, haven't thought back on them. They really didn't do anything for me, but this album, every single track on here is memorable, and I would say that one of my favorite openings and closings to an album, like maybe ever, honestly, especially for a hip hop album, Gummy at the beginning, Summer at the end. Gummy. It's just
Gummy's so good,
crazy. So I will talk about, you know, we've mentioned some of the general things. Those still apply here. Great production value in all the tracks. Again, great beats. Again, I think one of the most interesting things here is what they are rapping about. In a lot of cases, it's not what you have heard before. And although they will explicitly talk about it, in most situations, it's just like, it doesn't matter, right? So again, I would go back to them rapping about, the one rapper specifically rapping about being gay, where yes, he does, and I think it is this album.
Yes, Junkie.
He does specifically talk about how no one else talks about it, but in most tracks, like just like you mentioned, he's just talking about like giving head to another dude or getting head,
and exactly the same way.
And it's like free. It's not like they're lingering on it. It's like they are just rapping about what they want to rap about, and it is just so beautiful to listen to. Absolutely. Honestly, it's just like so clean. So I would say, you know, a lot of tracks are really great on here. For whatever reason, Tokyo really sticks out to me, which is interesting because it's like, you know, you have a really strong opening to this album, and then for me it feels like you have a second peak at Tokyo, and then you close out really strong, and then you peak again at the very end of this album with Summer, which is just an amazing song.
It's really good, yeah.
And they do some things that I think, and I think this is what you were talking about before, and I think it's specifically on this album too. They do some things where they do this like call and response, but the response is pitched up way higher. And I thought that was kind of fun.
Shifting, yeah.
Is they like pitch shift.
But again, on this album, it's not all like condensed into one section of the record. It's happening every now and again, and no track is like, oh, everyone's pitch shifted now. At least not that I remember. I think one of these albums has a song where like there's a lot of pitch shifting, but regardless, it's not like on Saturation 1 where there's just a whole stretch of the album where suddenly they started pitch shifting like every single song, and then they just stopped.
Right.
Which again left that album to feeling not quite cohesive as a full project, whereas this thing absolutely does. It's like there's flow from track to track.
Yeah.
It like you can easily take this out of the trilogy and just listen to this as its own album, which I have done
for sure.
And I have not done for really either of the other two. But one thing
real quick,
ahead.
The other thing, and I don't exactly remember if it happened in the first one or if it started here and going into the second one, but I feel like there was like a kid. Is that right?
No, it was probably a pitch shift. Yeah.
Okay.
No, there's no like kid.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, man, that really sounds like a kid in a lot of cases. Yeah, which, and even if it was or was not a kid, I don't know if it really matters at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Because like just doing that, just having a pitch shift to make yourself sound like a kid, or actually having a kid rap about these things, really made a lot of what they were rapping about in some of those verses where that happened, like real heavy.
Yeah.
And I can't, doesn't come to mind like which specific tracks it was, but I know
it is just pitch shifting. They do a handful of that, and occasionally, like I think on Saturation 1 they overused it to the point where it didn't have the impact I think it was meant to, because a lot of those songs were supposed to be really somber and sad, and I don't think it worked. And then when they use it more sparingly, it can have much greater effect.
The other thing, the kind of maybe final thing I would say about this one is this one felt generally lighter to me, I guess is how I would put it. And maybe it's just because of how Heat really kind of carried, like it set the expectation of the first album and carried through some of the other tracks in Saturation 1. This one felt more like you could really put this on hip hop radio pop charts.
Yeah. Well,
and
I mean, look at the album cover.
And just their album cover,
it's
right?
Very sunny. And the last two tracks, Sunny and Summer, it's like it even closes out in that way. One thing I wanted to point out about this is I mentioned the group's experimental side. I think that comes out more here, and I think it comes out even stronger here. I mean, Junkie, like, holy shit. That song is fucking that song is phenomenal. That's my second favorite of the trilogy. I think if they have there's only two songs I think that they've come out with in this trilogy that I'd say are like 10 out of 10 tracks, and those are the two, Heat and Junkie. And Junkie is phenomenal. I mean, again, that's another one like Heat where everybody's verse is just super memorable, because you kick off with Kevin Abstract's verse where he specifically calls out how, like, why do you always rap about being gay? Well, not enough people rapping are gay. And he specifically calls it out on this track. The beat is just so weird. And then, Amir's verse, specifically the title Junkie, he's talking about having been so drugged up his mom doesn't even recognize him. And when you get into like Matt Champion's verse, which Matt Champion's verse is the final closing, not technically the closing verse, but it's him and Kevin Abstract have the two most well-known verses here, because Kevin Abstract has the verse about being gay, and then Matt Champion has the verse where he's talking about dudes who are like pressuring women to have sex. Which, again, in hip-hop, like, that is, like, the exact opposite of what you expect somebody to do. And that's what he's talking about on this track. It's absolutely phenomenal. Like, this song is fucking brilliant. And, yeah, I'll agree with you on Gummy as well, which is just a fantastic opener.
And I would agree. In fact, I would probably put Junkie as one for me.
Your favorite
track in the trilogy. I just think it's not something that you've heard before, straight up, like in every way. And you mentioned it, from the beat to what they're actually talking about. It's just so different. And they nail it. I mean, they
so
nail it.
Yeah, the transition from verse to verse too is just so nuts. There's like this break, like right after Kevin Abstract's verse, is like this breakdown where the whole song just falls apart. God, it's so cool. And the interesting thing is too, is that each of these albums do seem to have like a track that is like much more out there than everything else, but especially this and the next one, maybe not one, but this and the next one is like this one. It is Junkie, and it doesn't do that too much. Like, your average pop listener might be really turned off by that song. I know I watched these guys' reaction to the song, and they're like, I don't even know what that was. I didn't understand that. Which I'm like, okay, well, it didn't seem that weird, but still, maybe that's just me. Regardless, it's like this album still.
Yeah, you listen to some pretty weird stuff.
Yeah, I listen to extremely weird stuff, so this didn't faze me at all. But I can see, like, it is very different, but the thing is, they don't do it too much. They don't overuse this. And same thing on Saturation 3, which we'll get to soon. They do a similar thing, but they don't overdo it. So most of this album, super easy to listen to, super fun and summery. And then this track is just like the dark depression that is all summed up in pretty much one song here, and Jesus, I guess, as opposed to when, like, Saturation 1 had that whole stretch. And the final song I want to call out is Fight, which again is probably my second favorite track here. It opens up with Amir gives this story of learning what racism was when he grew up in school. And it's my favorite verse of the trilogy. Well, probably my favorite verse of the trilogy. Like, it just blows me away. And the way that transitions into the second half of the track, phenomenal. Like, again, and that's right after Junkie. Like, they're only separated by a skit. And by the way, the skits here are starting to get a little better. They're starting to do a bit of a better job of transitioning through the record, where here they feel like necessary transitional pieces, whereas on Saturation 1, it was just like a skit and then a skit, and it just didn't really do anything.
Yeah, I felt like in 1, it broke up the flow of the album.
Yeah.
Where it was like, every time they came on, I was like, what's going on here? And I think that's probably why I would have put 1 as my least favorite, is because of the skits, honestly, because it really broke it up so much. Whereas I didn't feel that in 2.
And then you mentioned Summer, which I'll finish off with. I will say, actually, Summer is actually my least favorite closing track of the trilogy. I love them all, and it's a great song. But one thing I particularly love about it is Sunny to Summer. Again, I really like the way they titled the tracks. Even it kind of highlights this, but they are great together. They are great to close this album out. And yeah, that's how I describe this album. It's super summery. It's super sunny for the most part.
But I would like to posture on the idea of this album being more summery, more sunny, and it clearly is. I mean, the majority of the tracks here, like I mentioned, are I think you could very easily transition to pop and hip hop.
Yeah.
But, and maybe this is me overthinking it, but there's an element here of like masking some like real issues, real depression with that.
Absolutely.
And then as we talked about, because you have really hidden in here, honestly, like Junkie and Fight and some others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is...
So I think we'll move on to Saturation 3, which 2 people in the chat said was the best.
Okay.
And we already kind of gave away that it's not our favorites, but that's perfectly fine. So yeah, what about Saturation 3?
I mean, just in general, the way that they open these albums is like...
Yeah, I know.
They really go for
they
it.
kill it on the opener game. Seriously, every single time.
So again, like the first 3 tracks here, really the opening couple on this album are just so strong. I mean, they just hit it, they nail it. And it's like with Heat, I think my problem with Heat is it's like they nail what they were going for, but ultimately I didn't enjoy what they were going for because I thought that it like really was so different than what threw me off. Whereas like for the rest of these, for 2 and 3, it's like, man, they nail what they're going for, and it's just like it hits so hard and so well. It opens the album so well. It sets a great tone for the album, which is what
Boogie is fucking nuts. And I think Saturation 3 really needed an opener like that because this is the most experimental of the 3 records, I would say. There's definitely more experimenting going on here. This is the one that would probably turn off your average pop listener more than the other 2 would. Especially because Boogie is such a fucking wild opener, and it's not exactly weird, but it's so whacked out. Like everybody's going so nuts on this track that it's like, whoa, okay.
I agree. There are a couple others that stand out to me. Again, just as strong as I think they open these things, they close them equally strong. Again, I think that I really like Team. I thought that Team was another really strong closer to the album. I really enjoy when they do that sort of a thing on some of these tracks and in general in the closing tracks that they have. But yeah, I would definitely say that like of the 3, it does feel the most experimental, and that's why I think this one's kind of hard to place. In a way, that's why I probably wouldn't put this as my top, just because it's experimental in such a way where I didn't feel like it was as powerful or as memorable as 2 was, because I felt like 2 was much, and I wouldn't say that it was easier to listen to or more enjoyable to listen to necessarily, but I just felt like the way that 2 progressed was just again so much more memorable to me than how this track did. But I can definitely say that 1, I felt like compared to this, even though 1 was more was not as experimental as this one, I still felt like what they were going for here, they were really hitting on a lot of marks that I don't think 1 did necessarily.
And like I said earlier, I feel like this and 2 have a considerably higher production value than
Definitely.
1. I don't think this sounds any cheaper or
especially
more.
2. I felt like 2 really, like the going from 1 to 2, you could really feel it.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because 3 and 2 are like about at the same level on that.
Yeah.
And so but when you go from 1 to 2, it's pretty obvious. Now, so one thing I want to call out here is what I think the only thing that maybe holds Saturation 3 back for me, as opposed to 2, is that I do feel like this album occasionally falls into similar slumps that 1 did, not nearly to the same extent, but in the sense that you'll get 2 tracks back to back which are equally downtrodden, like in the case of at least a fair bit of Alaska and Bleach, which I don't think Alaska is the most downtrodden thing in the world, but Bleach and Alaska as a duo, it's not like you hit Bleach's low and then you really get pulled up on Alaska. Like 2 was just paced so well, and this album maybe not quite as much. Although the skits are the best on this one for sure, because every single one of them really has a place here, even more than they did on the last one. Mm-hmm. Here, the skits actually sound nice. None of them are great, but the backing instrumentals behind Roberto's monologues are actually like pleasant. They're very nice. They sound very cinematic, which makes sense because they're called Cinema on this album. Mm-hmm. Especially Cinema 3 to Team was a great transition there, where I feel like it really had a purpose. One track I want to call out because it is it's the craziest thing they've done is Sister Nation, especially Sister, the sister half of Sister Nation. when I say that Saturation 3 is their most experimental project, it's almost entirely because Sister Nation is on this record, which is like, this sounds like a fucking Death Grips track. Like, I was like, holy shit. Like, this one was crazy. Whereas Junkie isn't something I couldn't imagine a group doing. Like, this is pretty out there. Not necessarily like hard to listen to, but it's weird. And when I recognize something as being weird, that's something, It didn't necessarily throw me for a loop, but man, like, you've got the same distorted synth you had like at the end of Heat comes in, like, to fill out everybody's verse here, and it's just wild. The kind of track that I imagine when they play at live shows, they probably get a mosh. It's crazy. And then when that transitions into Nation, which, by the way, it's significant because it's the only track on the whole album that has 2 words in its title. They're all one words, but because they combine these 2 songs, and you can tell they're 2 different songs, just they stuck them together. But it's a great transition, and Nation is just wonderful. The singing on that song and like the washed out. Sometimes I don't like when beats get this washed out because it just kind of like blends together, but not here. I thought this was beautiful. And the 2 tracks do share some consistent themes where they're talking again about like their problems that they've had growing up and also living in America. But you have in the first half of Sister, Joba, he gives this just like terrifying verse where he's talking about, and like they had to bleep out some of the stuff that like that I thought was like, whoa.
Yeah,
he must have said something like.
Yeah, in fact, it was in such a way where I thought, is this for comedic effect? Because it was like, nothing else on this album is bleeped out. This is an explicit album.
Yeah.
And so when there were actual, like, they bleeped stuff out, I was like, was like this on purpose? Is this because he...
I think it's because he went too far. Because he's talking about, I have like, he's talking about going crazy. His therapist, like he doesn't take his forgetting some of the words, which is a shame because this is a really memorable verse, but he specifically says something where he's like, I've got bleep, but you would never know. It's like, what does he have? Like a collection of knives? That's what I'm assuming he said. But whatever the case, it was like, whoa. And yeah, everybody's verse on this, man, that's a great song. And finally, I guess it's important to mention Team, because this is not only the closer to this album, but it's the closer to the trilogy. And it's the first time that on a closer, they actually have the other members rap in the second half of the track. Because only the first half of the track is Bareface's part. And by the way, this is my favorite closer of the trilogy, especially Bareface's section, which when he gets into that upper register and they have that just washed out guitar sound come in, it's so beautiful. Like that thing is just a phenomenal sound. And then it closes out, and I think it's Kevin who comes in and says, I thought my world was progressive because my president was black. And I was like, oh, like, God, like, man, the final part of this thing, the raps, the verses here are amazing. Although I will say, my only issue is that I don't think the final 2 or 3 verses actually feel like they wrapped up anything. Like, Kevin's verse did. And so did Amir. Like Amir and Kevin trade off in the first half, and then the second half, I forget who's doing it. I think it's Matt Champion, and I'm not sure who the other one was, but their verses just were like verses on any other song. And maybe you could have done something more to really close this album, or close the trilogy. I mean, honestly, if you hadn't have even had this, if you put this rap section first and then you had Bareface's section, that might have been better, because I think his really felt like a closing statement. But whatever the case, it's a fantastic song, one of my favorites. So, anything else you want to say about Saturation 3?
No, I think that's good.
All right, then. Thoughts on the trilogy overall and your scores?
Thinking of the trilogy overall. So I guess starting with like, I feel that what was so great about this trilogy is that each of these are definitely powerful as standalone albums.
They are. Yeah.
But I feel like having listened to all 3 of them, the overall experience was really enhanced, which is, probably the mark of a really great trilogy is that. And the other thing I would mention is that I feel like what was interesting is I went from one to the next to the next, right? And they had a really great flow from album to album. And then even I kind of wrapped back around, and 3 kind of flows back into 1.
Yeah, the same sample that opens Heat closes out Team,
right? Which was obviously like not that hard to do, but it was one of those smart little touches that really puts a nice bow on the whole trilogy. So in general, I would say, just again, generally I would probably rank these as 2 was my favorite, then 3, then 1. But that is not to say that I felt like any of these were less than probably an 8. I think 1 to me would probably get an 8, 3, and 2 probably right around a 9 for me, honestly. And it's like 2 just edges out 3. But and then in general, I would say, I guess I would kind of average that. I think that the trilogy probably I would put it at like a 9, I guess.
Sure.
Going up, because I had not heard of this group going in. I did not know what to expect, and I was just really blown away having listening to this.
Well, and it does its job, right? Because the title saturation, they're saturating the market in the second half of 1 year, and it actually worked because people paid attention. They're like, this group is big now. Maybe not like necessarily mainstream big. They're like as mainstream as they're like as mainstream as a music community group can be. You know, a group that's cultivated by the music, like by fans of music, and they're not necessarily going to be on the radio all the time, but like, this is as big as one of those groups can be. And I could definitely see them like, if they continue to drop records, which they had one coming out now that got delayed because of the Amir situation. But regardless, if they continue to keep going and this doesn't break them up, I could see them making it to the radio if they haven't already. But I mean like top 40 radio. Like, they're really on the cusp of that. At least they were before this situation. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But regardless, yeah, I think it's funny that they called it saturation. And like, it's like we did set like they're what? How many songs are on this thing? Like, if there's 17 on the first, 16 on the next, it's like over like maybe 50, like near 50 tracks or something like that. Which yeah, and just the fact that like most of them are really strong is extremely impressive. In a way, saturation is basically like a triple album, because it's not necessarily hard for me to think of them as separate albums because I return to 2 quite a bit. But when you do listen to them as a triple album, like just back to back, they actually work, which is really impressive. And I know that when they release these to CD, they release it as like a triple disc set, which makes sense. So it's like a triple album, and a really good one at that. If I had to rank them, I would do the exact same ranking that you did: 2, 3, and then 1. And if I had to score them individually, 1 I would give a 7. I think that 1 is good, but I find it to be too inconsistent. And maybe, like, again, Heat's my favorite song on the whole trilogy, but as a whole album, it's not very consistent. It's not very cohesive, and as opposed to 2, which is extremely consistent and extremely cohesive. And 2, I would give like an 8.5. I don't want to quite go to a 9 because I don't know that every single song is like blowing me away to like a 9 category, but some of them certainly do. And then 3, I would give like an 8. So yeah, at trilogy as a whole, an 8. I think is fair.
So I would say one little thing to add. It felt like with 1, they were still kind of finding where this thing was going.
Definitely.
Right? Finding the voice of this trilogy. And by 2 and then into 3, they really nailed it.
Definitely. Yeah, and I mean, 2 is where I think the group really found themselves, absolutely. Now, they had a mixtape before 1, which I have not heard good things about. I may check it out. But I would still say that 1, as a debut album, and not a mixtape, it's still, I mean, like, they come through. I mean, like I said, on Heat, like, that thing it's like every member just gives it their all. Some of their best performances on the trilogy, period. It didn't take them that long to get songs as good as that and other stuff, and to know what they wanted each member to do and what they wanted each member to be. So, you know, even with that said, I still don't think that like 1 is such a slump. I think it's still worth hearing. But I would recommend 2 first. But as for whether we'd recommend this trilogy, I think it's easy to say we both would, especially if you like hip hop. But if you do, you've already heard it, because this was a major release last year. And I think that's all for saturation.
From 1 to Gucci Gang, it gets a Gucci Gang.
Gets a strong Gucci Gang. Yeah. Yeah, definitely nearly as good as Lil Pump. That's what I will say about saturation.
And that's a high bar. Okay, so I recommended to you the Dark Knight Trilogy, a 2000s, 2010s trilogy of Batman films. It was kind of reboot of the Batman franchise coming out of the Schumacher Batman films.
Although quite a while after.
Directed by Nolan, with some writing credit to Goyer and Nolan.
Christopher Nolan, for anybody
Christopher
who doesn't
Nolan.
know.
So with that, I will hand it back over to you to talk about the first one.
Should we mention that you haven't gone back and rewatched, so I will be handling a lot of the...
Yeah, a lot of what I'll be talking about here definitely will be coming from memory. So probably with this first one, if it begins, it's been a very long time. I saw it in theaters right when it came out, and I haven't seen it since. But the other two I've seen more recently. So
okay. Yeah, so Batman Begins was the only one I hadn't seen anything from. I thought I'd seen all of Dark Knight before, but having watched it again, I might not have ever watched the whole film. I know I watched Rises in theaters. I know that. But I didn't remember jack shit about it besides like Bane, which everybody remembers. So Batman Begins was the first time I've seen this, and I think that's good because I went into the trilogy watching the first film when I actually sat down and watched the whole trilogy. So this was a good way to intro that. And you know what I'll say about Batman Begins? This movie is extremely inconsistent. And because it's a really fantastic middle third shoved in between two rather lackluster thirds, which by the middle third, it's like almost like some of the action scenes are as good as the action scenes, or at least nearly as good as the action scenes in The Dark Knight. And the directing is nearly as good as it was in The Dark Knight. Performance is obviously not, because you don't have the Joker. But
which, real quick, I want to talk about that, because what's very interesting about this trilogy is that as an idea, they did not start this Batman trilogy with Batman's most iconic villain. And I think that that's a very interesting take. And honestly, a lot of credit to WB, because they put a lot of trust in this one, because, Batman's going to bring people to theaters, but who's this? We'll get there, but who's this whatever guy? Yeah. We don't know who this guy is. So.
Yeah, and I want to give them a ton of credit for that, by the way, because I think that if you had put the Joker in this, you would not have gotten the full potential of the Joker, because this movie, you also have to have the suiting up, you have to have the getting the gear, you have to have the stuff that every single superhero origin story has to have, which again is something that drags down this movie. But if you put the Joker into this, I guarantee you, man, if the Joker is in this, like, the Dark Knight is basically considered a classic at this point. Batman Begins would have absolutely never had that, even if it had Heath Ledger's Joker, because it just has too much to go through.
And I think what's interesting is it's like, very well, this could have ended here, right? You could have ended a Batman reboot with a Batman movie that didn't have the Joker.
Yeah.
And so they took that risk, I think, is commendable.
I was saying to you also, it's like, if this didn't do well, there would be a movie called Batman Begins.
Yeah.
Like, this movie does not stand alone in the slightest. Everybody knows this movie only because The Dark Knight came after. I mean, even if it did this well, if The Dark Knight hadn't happened, man, this thing would be a flash in the pan, I'm going to put up the spoiler tag because I want to start actually getting into it. So in this movie...
The other thing I want to say...
spoilers down?
You can put spoilers down, okay. Yeah. Quickly, the other thing I want to say is... so thinking to the Batman films that came before this, I want to kind of say that this was really the first one that spent a lot of time in the origin, hence the name. In fact, Batman Begins, or this style of Batman, kind of came out of some of the, I can't think of the writer right now, but he has a very similar, like, Dark Knight Rises or Dark Knight Begins line of comics that came out before this. But probably the most famous Batman movie with Michael Keaton really wasn't an origin story necessarily. You learned of his origin, but not in the way of this, which in a lot of cases is a product of its time. By this point, by 2005, the Spider-Man movie had come out and was very successful as Spider-Man. A couple of them, I believe, or at least one at this point, had come out and was very successful as an origin story. X-Men were very successful as an origin story. But I would just note that I think it's interesting that this really kicked off a lot of the common and now more familiar aspects of superhero films.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, now I'll put up. So this film's villain. Each film has its own villain, which I think is an interesting thing. I don't know if I like that decision, but we'll get to it. For this film, the
each
villain,
almost have two villains.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean that the threat. Yeah, you're right, but like the threat is always unique. It's always something new. Even if it calls back to something from another movie, it's always a new character. And yeah, they pretty much all do have two villain. Well, I don't. Rises didn't. It kind of did. We'll get there.
We'll get there.
But in Batman Begins, the main villain is Ra's al Ghul, who in the beginning of the film, the origin story is that Batman gets trained by Ra's al Ghul, who we believe is like this. We believe this like, I don't know if they're in Tibet, but wherever the hell they are, they're in the Himalayas, I believe. They're in like mountains in Asia, and the guy is like, you've got Liam Neeson, who is supposed to not be Ra's al Ghul. Spoilers up, so he is Ra's al Ghul, but he makes you believe he isn't, and Ra's al Ghul's like his mentor, like a monk. And so Bruce Wayne, in the opening of the movie, we get this honestly terrible scene with him as a kid falling into a pit and then being scared of bats. Child actor was fucking horrible. What an awful way to kick off this franchise. I was like, oh god.
But
Jesus
I want to say that this scene is specifically called back in Batman versus Superman. Although in that one, the kid flies up back through the hole.
Worse. Oh, don't worry. We'll mention. I want to mention the DC stuff after this, but we'll get there. I'll do it briefly, but I'm sure I'll take shots at it. So yeah, that was a really bad way to open this movie, because I mean, I understand that's how you had to open it, but it's just the way the scene progressed. The acting in the scene was horrible. And so yeah, that didn't get me excited, and neither did the rest of the entire first third of this film, which is honestly pretty bad. I know people have mentioned it before. I know I've heard about it talked about this way, that the fight choreography in this movie is really lumbering and crappy, and that's absolutely true. Especially in this sequence when he's out there in the ice with Liam Neeson training, and they're like hitting each other, and it's just pathetic. Like, it's so poorly directed. Like, they did not, like, I don't know if they even had a fight choreographer, because honestly, some of these fight scenes, it's all in the editing. You don't really see any punches actually hit anyone. It's just edited around so quickly. It's that 2000s editing style that I can't stand, and it's in a lot of the beginning of this film. You don't see Nolan coming into his own as a director. I mean, again, this wasn't his first project, obviously. He had plenty of other stuff, plenty of other big stuff too. But as a superhero film director,
but a lot of weird stuff, I would say, like Memento and that sort of a thing. So he wasn't necessarily known for creating superhero films. So it's interesting that they gave him the.
And that's what I'm referring to when I say come into his own. Like, as an action director, as a director of The Dark Knight, one of the things he's mainly known for now, you don't, like, this director seems kind of like your average, oh, here's a director we got from studio, whatever, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't seem like his name is a really big name, like it even matters when you're watching this movie. At least for this third. Well, anyway, once you get past this training sequence, the monk dies, and so he was Ra's al Ghul. No, he wasn't. It was actually the boring white guy who was Ra's al Ghul. Liam Neeson, good actor, of course, but all he can play is Liam Neeson. Like, every time I've ever seen him, he's just Liam Neeson, and there's a reason everybody makes fun of him, because, like, sure, he can deliver a line well, but it's like, it's all the fucking same. And to have him be your lead villain, it just doesn't work.
Batman took his daughter.
Yeah.
Which actually maybe we'll get to in the last movie, but we'll go.
Yeah, so that's right. So anyway, I don't like him as a villain, and thankfully, once you get into the second third, when Batman actually starts gearing up, starts becoming.
Well, I'll say it. Liam Neeson was phoning it in at this point in time. If you think about like Phantom Menace and then going into this, I mean, you could tell.
Yeah, he didn't give a shit. He's doing the same thing he's always done, and that's why I was bored by his.
And this project was honestly because of kind of what we talked about. I bet this project was just what was really a shot in the dark for WB, and so. Get Liam Neeson on. Liam Neeson's like, whatever, I'll do it.
I'll be Liam Neeson. I'll be the stoic guy who is stoic and is stoic.
I'll be the secret white guy.
Yeah, secret white guy. He was boring. Thankfully, though, when you get into the part where Batman starts gearing up, this is the middle third of the film. You get some scenes with Batman actually attacking people. You get his first utterance of "I'm Batman," then he punches somebody, which actually made me die. That was fucking hilarious. Which is, I guess, it's the only shame, and this continues throughout the whole trilogy. Yeah,
how do you feel about Christian Bale as?
I like him a lot, but God, it is hard to take him seriously. Like, it's everybody mocked it, and you can see why. And I love his presence. I love the way he looks. And honestly, even the gruff voice, as funny as it is, it works. Like, Batman Begins did a great job of making me believe this universe. This is, I think, maybe the first time where we were really able to believe that Batman could be real. Sure, in the Michael Keaton Batman movie, it's a darker movie than people give it credit for. It's still pretty comic book, but it's a darker film. I don't think this is an unprecedented direction for Batman, but it wasn't gritty. And it certainly wasn't like this could happen in real life. And that's what the Dark Knight Trilogy, that's what this film and the next film really allowed you to believe, is that this could really happen. And I think that Batman... So yes, it's silly, but God, when people are running around trying to run away from Batman, then he just shows up and it's fucking sweet. The first scene that we get with him is in this yard with a bunch of big shipping containers, and there's like a delivery of some sort of drug. I don't think we know what yet at this point, and Batman's just like falling in front of people and beating them up, and everyone's terrified, and the directing in this action scene is so tense. It's great. And yeah, so in this film, you get that crime film element as well. They take a lot of inspiration from crime films, this and the next one, where there's like an underground mob in Gotham, and, you know, the League of Shadows, led by Ra's al Ghul, they train Batman to be a villain to Gotham, essentially, to destroy Gotham so that it could have a fresh start from all the corruption. It's an understandable motivation, but it's pretty comic book. It's like, if you really wanted to do good... I just don't believe that you're gonna be like, let's just fucking kill everyone. Like, I don't buy that. But it's a good enough motivation where at least it makes some of the villains believable, where they're not just ridiculous. But Batman is like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna use your training and I'm gonna use it for good. I won't kill anyone. Which, by the way, there are points when he just drives right the fuck over cop cars. Like, you didn't give a shit if you're gonna kill him or not. But whatever, I can buy it.
They're asleep.
Yeah, they're asleep. But for the most part, it's like you can tell he's not gonna kill anyone. And I like that. This sort of message of pacifism, kind of. But regardless, really cool. I love the scenes with Batman. This entire middle third where he's tracking down the Scarecrow, who is the main villain of this section of the film, not necessarily the whole film. And I don't know how the fuck they managed to make me believe that the Scarecrow could exist, right? Because, like, I don't know about him in the comic books, but just if you told me what he does in this film, where, like, he puts on a mask and then like, he gives people these hallucinations that he's giant and terrifying. But it makes sense. He's a corrupt psychiatrist, sort of, where, like, he's handling the mental patients, but he's intentionally making them go insane with this gas and this Scarecrow mask. And they call him the Scarecrow because that's what the people call him when they get terrified of him. He didn't really name himself that. I like that element, too. It's another way to make it believable. And so the Batman comes into contact with him and realizes he never really defeats the Scarecrow. That's another thing I liked. I mean, he kind of does, but, like, he doesn't, like, he doesn't, like, subdue the Scarecrow really in this movie. Only a little bit. The Scarecrow just kind of gets away for all we know, and he actually does, because he shows up in the next two films. But, like, he's pumping this gas that's terrifying everybody into the city's water systems, and he's going to blow it all up and make everyone have the hallucinations. And this is the part where the film loses me again, because now, and all three of the movies do this, but particularly the first and the last one, they do this faux disaster movie stuff where it has to be the whole town is about to collapse and Batman has to save the day. And it's like everybody's dying and going nuts, and then Batman saves it last minute. And I don't really care for that. That leaves for the ending of this film particularly to be really forgettable. I will not remember how Batman Begins ends in just a few months. I only watched it recently. And this is when Ra's al Ghul comes back because this was part of his plan. And he shows up, and the Batman, another kind of ridiculous thing, is the Batman kills him, but not by technicality, because he gets in the subway with Ra's al Ghul, and then he cuts off the subway so that he's going to crash right into a building. And Ra's al Ghul's like, but won't you kill me? So you're going to kill me. You're finally going to do it. No, but I don't have to save you either. It's like, Batman, if you don't save him, you're killing him. You know he's going to crash and die. Like, come on. That's bullshit.
No, Schrodinger's
yeah.
Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah, no, that's garbage. I don't like that. So, whatever. It was fine. This scene, this third of the film, the disaster movie stuff, isn't as bad as, like, the first third. It's not bad. It's just kind of average. I didn't really care. But the thing is, I think that the strength of the middle third of this film, and the last third not being bad necessarily, I think it actually really carries this movie. Like, this is a film that makes you believe the Batman, which is crazy. and that's important. It lays a good foundation, and overall, I think it's a good film. I'd give it like a 7. I think it's good, and I only think it's good because the middle third is so fantastic, and the rest is just kind of whatever. But yeah, I can see why this would have left people clamoring for something more from Nolan, and I don't think anybody knew what was coming next, because Batman Begins is a movie that only works as an intro to a trilogy. I don't think anybody ever could have anticipated that the next film, you don't even have to know that Batman Begins exists. You don't even have to know that The Dark Knight Rises exist. It completely stands on its own. And I'm assuming you don't have anything to say more about Batman Begins, so I think
the only other thing I would say, and this is just a general note about the trilogy, so this film introduced Michael Caine as Alfred, right? I think Michael Caine's portrayal of Alfred is just perfect. I love just in general, I love Michael Caine.
He's fantastic.
So he's fantastic here. Does this film also introduce Lucius Fox?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, and Morgan Freeman does a great job as Lucius Fox too. Yeah. Really, the band around Batman in these trilogies are very strong, even as we go forward into including other characters in his small group. But Michael Caine, Christopher,
Rachel,
and and Rachel is in this. Right. She's okay, but like Batman's core characters around him. I think the actors do a great job portraying those.
Yeah, and finally, Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne is really good. Like, no matter how
I was gonna wait until we got to the third one to ask you that, because
that's fair.
Because the third one I feel like is the most situations when you get Bruce Wayne.
Yeah,
that for me is actually the only thing I do not like about this trilogy.
You don't think that Bruce Wayne is good?
I did not believe his Bruce Wayne. Now, I don't think that Bruce Wayne has to be like this playboy, millionaire, whatever, right? Because he's not really portrayed that way in this trilogy necessarily.
Like
he's like apathetic, but I don't buy this guy who's going around like, I'm Batman, and like punching people in the face.
Well, I think it's good you were going to wait till the third movie, because I will share your opinion in a little while. But for right now, I'll say that I think Bruce Wayne was good. I like that he's like an apathetic billionaire, not to the point of like, you know, that he has this Batman side of him. He actually isn't totally apathetic, but I enjoyed that. And in Batman Begins, when like he goes in there and he intentionally sabotages his own party, he does that in this film, and I enjoyed that about his character. So I thought that was fine.
Frank Miller was the name I was trying to remember earlier, who had like the kind of darker tone on the Rise of Batman.
So now we're into The Dark Knight. And this film, like I was just saying, this one is like, I don't see this as part of a trilogy. Like, if I ever go back and watch a Nolan trilogy film, I'm just going to watch this. And it's not necessarily a blight against the other two, but it's just like, this film, it doesn't just stand on its own because it's a great movie. It stands on its own because it really doesn't have anything to, like, it only circumstantially has to do with the other two films. The overarching arc of the trilogy isn't even really present in this movie, which is the League of Shadows. Joker isn't a part of the League of Shadows. And so I think that this film is just stands on its own as a Batman film, in the same way that Batman from 1989 stands on its own as a Batman film. And I'll put up the spoiler tag right away.
And again, I think, go for it. I think that a common thread here is that the Joker appears in both of those films.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that the Joker is the reason why this movie, it is and is not the reason why this movie is, for me, the best one. I think you would agree.
Oh, of course. Who wouldn't?
So the villain itself was not the crux of why this movie is so good, except for the fact that the villain is portrayed in such a way, one, such a different take on the villain, and two, acted in such a way that was just the interactions that villain has with all of the characters, and the way Heath Ledger portrayed the character, it was just something to behold, really. And I guess we should mention that I want to say within the same year of this movie coming out, so earlier the year before this movie released, Heath Ledger died before this movie had released. So that was weighing on everyone's mind. And then after having seen this, I think it was very quickly people had started to, put Heath in some of the upper echelons, because it's like him going into this film, and first of all, he was a method actor. He was a well-known method actor, and he method acted for this role. So
not like Jared Leto method acting, though, I hope.
Right. So you have to think about that weighing in on this. But yeah, I mean, I would say just right off the bat with this one, phenomenal.
So yeah. Right off the bat in this movie, opening scene is spectacular. It opens, and that's a big difference from the last one. It opens with a robbery, and you've got all these people in funny masks running in, and they're like killing each other. Like, what the fuck is going on? Like, and it makes no sense. And then the Joker shows up in one of the masks, and suddenly it makes sense. It's like he's just playing. It establishes every single thing you need to know about this villain right there, and it does it visually. He's got a bunch of henchmen, but they're all just killing each other. Like, there's a plan, but there's kind of not a plan, because his whole thing is he just wants anarchy. Like, that's what I love about this film, is that his motivation makes the most sense in a weird way, because he's doing what he does just because he just fucking loves it. And as opposed to, we're going to kill everybody to fix Gotham. It's kind of weird. Joker's just like, and we really delve into his psyche and why he does what he does. He's like, he wants to prove to them that the rules, that society, that everything doesn't make sense, and that it's all gonna fall apart at any moment, and all he has to do is establish chaos. And that's his entire character. And every scene, his dialogue, every scene with him, his dialogue, his acting, it's like every single thing. This is one of the most interesting movie villains to have ever been. Like, forget one of the most interesting Joker, or the most interesting Joker. Like, one of the most interesting movie villains ever. Because you're almost more interested to find out what the Joker is and how he thinks than you are to even know what he's going to do. Like, you almost don't care. It's like, why is he doing this? And in every single scene, you get a sense of it. One thing I love, too, is there's the famous, like, monologue he gives where he's talking about why he got his scars, the Why So Serious Hot Topic thing, which is what it is now. It's hard to put yourself in a position, be like, man, that's such a cool line, because now it's just like, ugh, gross. But regardless, he actually gives this monologue a few times, and he tells it a different way every time. Like, is he lying? Like, he might just be fucking lying. He might just be doing this to scare somebody because he thinks it's fun. And I loved that about it. I loved that every single time we've got all these criminals, like in the last film, who are plotting out what they're going to do. This mob who has a big plan, and they want to get money to this to this businessman in China and all this stuff. But the Joker, he just comes in and everybody just hates him. Like, oh God, not this freak. Because like, he is the only one here who just wants to fuck shit up. And I love that. Every single scene he's in, he fucking kills. You're right that his performance is on a whole nother like level. One of the best performances I've ever seen, and he deserves all the credit for it.
And I would add on to that, not just the way he carried his lines, but you kind of alluded to also just like the small mannerisms that were him and not direction. Just like licking his lips constantly, right? Those little touches, the way that he carries himself, But I would say with this film specifically, it's like as strong as Ledger was, and as strong as Joker was, and has as much as he carried those scenes, the actors around him in those scenes were equally like matching that level. Yes. I want to say honestly, he brought up the watermark of the acting and the people around him. Absolutely. Because those interactions, those solo interactions that he has first with Christian Bale as Batman in the room, which is like that interrogation room, which is just
best scene in the trilogy.
A great scene.
Yeah, and everyone remembers that.
And then even the hospital scene that he has, where it's just him and Harvey Dent. Mm-hmm. Again,
it's amazing.
The one thing also I'll say, because I just remembered it, we didn't mention it in the last one, but the other person here who, again, around Batman as a small cast, Commissioner Gordon.
Right.
And so a great portrayal of Commissioner Gordon here. So
yeah, he was in the last one too. I did forget about that. Yeah. And I think the action scenes with Batman are fantastic.
This movie introduces or utilizes more the Batmobile, right?
And uses more it introduces the Batmobile motorcycle thing, which is so fucking cool.
Yeah.
That whole scene, one of the most memorable scenes, is when he like drives under a truck and just blows it up from the front and it flips over onto the street. It's like an amazing stunt. So many of the stunts are.
And is that the one where Joker is like standing there as it's going up?
Yeah, I believe so, because he's like walking in front, waiting for like to fuck with the Batman. And again, he doesn't even want the Batman. He doesn't even want to kill Batman. In fact, he'd be fine if the Batman kills him. He's like, kill me, I want you to do it. He just wants shit to happen. Like, he just likes to be there when Batman's coming in, like taking him super seriously, and everybody's taking him super seriously, and they don't realize he is not taking any of this seriously. Although he does have an ideology behind it, which is another interesting thing. But yeah, the action scenes with Batman are great, so memorable. Fight choreography is just a million times better than it was in Batman Begins. It's like everything was gotten right here. The interactions with Alfred and Batman are like pretty much just as good as they were in the last one, although you do get more of them, it seems like. And yeah, the usage of the equipment is more interesting. In the last film, there was this dumb thing where he calls in a bunch of bats that made no sense, and thankfully that never happened again. That was one of the stupid things in that movie that you couldn't buy. Like, the fact that they make this believable is insane. I can't fathom how difficult that must have been, especially because some of the script writing is really not that good. And I've seen that talked about a lot as, like, the script in all these three movies is kind of shitty. Like, if you sit down and read a transcript of this movie, it's like, what the like, this is dumb. But everybody makes it work. Especially Heath Ledger, who must have been working overdrive to make his script work. Like, those why so serious things are kind of stupid. And the only reason they seem so cool and so intimidating is because he did them. I feel the same way about every actor here. But I mean, yeah, it's phenomenal. Harvey Dent, we didn't even mention, but he is maybe like the sleeper hit villain, I would say, because his motivation, of course, this movie didn't make it up, but still, like, his motivation is perhaps the most believable. His transition is the most believable than like anybody else. And it's directly tied to Joker. For most of this film.
Although I would say, and I don't think this is the dominant opinion, but I would say that this film tries to do a lot. And one of those things that it does is the Harvey Dent turn to Two-Face, and then also in a way wraps that up all in one film. And you can tell as it gets into it, and it does it for a reason. Harvey Dent then becomes a great foil for the Joker, and that interaction then moving towards this animosity for Batman all as it is great, and having seen that is great. But I would say the weakest part of this, I feel like, is how rushed some of that feels, in a sense, how quick that is to happen. His transition.
It's a bit quick, but it's believable though, because they lay a great groundwork for it to happen, where you don't necessarily feel like you're not really questioning how we got here.
This
maybe
is
like,
one of
could have added a scene.
I would say for me, this is one of those things, and maybe this is just my memory, so you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but this is one of those things where they knew they were going to make a series of movies. I don't know if they knew they were going to make a trilogy, but they knew they were going to make a series of movies, right? And this is one of those things where if you would have introduced Harvey in the movie before and move him through and carry him through and have that connection point into this film, I feel like that would have made it not feel as quick, because unless I'm wrong, I believe Harvey is introduced in this one and becomes Two-Face and kind of wraps that up.
I like that though, because again, The Dark Knight is its own film. I like that, like, the second film in a trilogy is always the one that is the most tied to the other two. And I like that this movie is like the opposite of that. It is the least tied to the trilogy. And that's because Harvey Dent is a character from the beginning to the end of this film, and he has his entire arc. And I didn't find it hard to buy. Like, again, I agree that maybe there could have been a scene there. Maybe there was that was cut. This is a long movie.
Very long movie.
Oh, God, but the next one's even longer. They each get longer, which is nice. But, yeah, but I thought it all worked really well, and especially the final. It was really bold to make the final scene a Two-Face scene. It wasn't even a Joker scene. Joker gets finished before the final Two-Face scene, where he's like threatening Commissioner Gordon's kids, and they have to lie to make up that the Batman killed him, so that people can use Harvey Dent as a symbol, which is something I really like about this film. There's a lot of that also political angle to the way that they make their calculations, and it's not boring at all. It's actually extremely interesting. Really, this movie works better as a thriller than it does as an action film, and as like a crime drama than it does as an action film. That's not to say that the action scenes aren't fantastic, but the dialogue and the interrogation scene and all this stuff is so phenomenal. It's like the best stuff in the movie.
Yeah, because the other thing, we haven't mentioned it, but the other big thing here is when Batman has to make a choice between saving Rachel or saving Harvey Dent, because they're both going to blow up.
And well, the thing is, he chooses Rachel, but he was led to the wrong place by Joker, so that he would actually choose Harvey Dent, because Joker knew he was going to choose Rachel, and by choosing Harvey Dent and letting Rachel die, that's what makes Harvey Dent turn against Batman.
Right.
Because Harvey Dent was like on his side. He wasn't on his side, then he was, and then he wasn't. But I loved Harvey Dent's arc in this movie. I love when he turns into. I agree the transition was quick. I didn't find it to be too quick though. I was like, okay, we laid a really great foundation, and by the time it happened, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I get it. The only thing that may have been too quick was him turning against everybody, because Harvey Dent was such a strong-willed person, and he really wanted to end corruption, and maybe it was quick, but then again, we've seen the Joker had that effect on everybody else, and he did it in one scene, and it's it actually kind of made sense. It was yeah, I can see it. His speech, because the Joker has this weird way where he makes you almost agree with him, which I don't know how the fuck Heath Ledger pulled that off, and it's not even in the script, because again, some of the stuff he says is just kind of patently absurd, but it's the way Heath Ledger portrays and delivers these lines. You're yeah, I can kind of see what you're saying. And same thing with pretty much everybody. Everybody's ideology makes sense in this movie, which is great. You believe everybody, you believe their motivations, and everybody's kind of swaying you. The only thing I didn't like about the movie was there was the final action scene with the Joker. He had this equipment where it could see through walls, and that editing was terrible, and that action scene was kind of crappy. And that was a shame, because that was the final scene with the Joker where, he's got these two boats ready to blow each other up, and it's got that disaster movie angle, but not to the same extent the other two do, which it felt more grounded, I'll say that, which I loved about it compared to the other two, is that, yes, the whole city was about to blow up, but it didn't really feel like it. It felt more personal, which was great. And I guess I've said all I need to say about the movie, so I'll wrap it up. I'll give the movie a 9.5. I was this is a 10 until that action scene. I was this is, and that's not to say anything too negative about the movie. It's just that was a pretty large flaw that was hard to overlook. But man, this thing is a fucking classic. I don't think it's too controversial for me to say that this is the best superhero film ever made. I think it's at least floated as being one of them, and I have not seen a better one. There was a time when I used to prefer the Michael Keaton one, but again, I don't think I ever saw the whole film. I've seen the whole film, and I'm yeah, this is better. And that one's great too, don't get me wrong, but man, this fucking nailed Batman.
Yeah, and I didn't rate the last one. It's been probably too long since I've seen the last one, but I would agree this one, and I haven't seen this one in a while, but just even all these years later, thinking back on this, definitely similar scoring for me.
Yeah.
I'd probably even go a little higher. I probably still wouldn't go to a full 10. I think that, like I said, there are some things for me, just the how much they try to cram in here at times feels like a lot, but never to the point where it's I'm distracted or I'm taken out of the film. So yeah, probably a 9.5, 9.75, something like that.
And here we are on The Dark Knight Rises, which I will say, the most controversial of the three, from what I've seen. It seems like reception to this was really mixed. And I remembered loving it when I saw it.
Yeah, so I think one of the things here is obviously that second movie just set such a ridiculously high watermark to meet. And they definitely, I strictly remember this, they definitely tried to market this film as this is the next huge event. It's going to carry so much weight. You're going to be blown away. Remember, all the trailers were very specifically targeted in such a way to make you want to call back to the previous one.
And the title.
And Dark Knight Rises, even the title.
It's not even presenting itself as an end to this trilogy. It's presenting itself as a sequel to The Dark Knight specifically.
Right.
Which again, because The Dark Knight was such a standalone film in a way, I get it, but it was clearly a marketing decision. And yeah, no, I didn't care for this, which is funny because I watched this in theaters and I remember loving it. I hadn't seen the other ones and I wasn't paying much attention. It was just a big spectacle and that was cool. But this movie, so it's not a bad film. I think there's good stuff in it scattered throughout. And it is more consistent than Batman Begins, I guess, in a way, but it's consistently kind of average, as opposed to Batman Begins, which was bad, fantastic, and then This is like the whole way through. The opening scene... Okay. So I'm familiar with the Bane posting meme.
Batman.
For you, it would be extremely painful.
Batman.
For you. Oh my god, it's dumb. And I'm like, what the hell happened? Because even Batman Begins, it was never dumb. It would like the last two films were really, and again, we can take it away from the trilogy, but we're talking about trilogies, so I'm trying to compare it. But even in its own film, I don't think it works. But in the trilogy, especially not. This thing just complete tonal shift from the last two. It is not at all going for the same thing that those two movies were. So as a closer to the trilogy, I just don't know what the hell they were thinking, honestly. I don't know what the fuck. Bane as the villain? I mean, you want to do fucking, like, grounded Batman and you're going to make Bane the villain? Like, this is the strong arm, like... And they tried by, like, not making him... Like, I've seen him in the comics, and I remember him in fucking Batman and Robin. And it's so silly.
Yeah, he didn't venom up that much in this one.
They tried to, but it's like that, like, oh, I remember that whole voice. It's so dumb. And he looks stupid, like his fat is coming out from his mask. He looks dumb. And it's a shame, so let's take it out of the trilogy because
but I would say, okay, thinking about the villains. Mm-hmm. So they blew their wad with Joker and Two-Face, right? And you had to. Right, you weren't. After a follow-up to the first one, okay, they took a chance by not including Joker. There's no way they wait till the third movie to include Joker. And so thinking about Batman's cast of characters and just thinking about what this trilogy is going for, which is definitely a much more gritty, much more grounded Batman, it's hard to say what other villain you could have brought into the mix. Maybe the Penguin, although he's kind of a ridiculous character.
He's even more ridiculous.
Mr. Freeze, again.
Well, I understand
the Riddler.
I understand that point, but I can't just use that to just excuse Poison Ivy. I can't use that. I can't justify using that to excuse how dumb Bane was. Like,
definitely.
Maybe he was the best pick, but if the best pick is still kind of crap, it's like, well. And I mean, and news just came out. I searched it up 2 days ago. News articles coming out that it has been confirmed that the Joker was supposed to be the villain in this movie. At least he was going to make a return. It said, and he didn't because he died. But that's like literally breaking news. Like I looked this movie up, and 2 days ago, articles coming out that Heath Ledger's family confirmed that. And maybe they were going to make him the main villain, which would have been weird trilogy wise, but it would have been better because he was great. Yeah, and you want to talk faux disaster movie crap? This movie goes ridiculous. It's like there's like literally a fucking nuke. They're gonna nuke the city, and there's like it's literally a ticking time bomb that it cuts back to. It ticks down. That's just dumb. Like
they collapse a football field at one point. I remember that was in all the.
It was a cool shot.
It was a cool shot,
but obvious set piece too.
They have some call outs. I think this is really, to my memory, the first one where they do have call outs to the larger DC universe. So in that football one, they specifically call out, can't remember the character's name right now.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But Cyborg. So he is there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do a couple of those in this one.
Shit, I didn't have the fucking spoiler tag up. Damn. Well, sorry.
Sorry, everyone.
You've probably seen this. Whatever.
Yeah.
You should. Hopefully they clicked away by the spoilers before. But anyway, yeah. So I'm just trying to. So let's take it out of the trilogy, because this movie really isn't even trying to be grounded anymore. That's why I think it's weird, is because unlike the other two, it's not even fucking trying. It's not just that it failed. It is not even trying. There's more comic relief. There are more jokes. The scope is larger and the spectacle is much higher. This is like a spectacle action film. And like all of those, it's like it's over and done with and you kind of just forget you watched it. Which is weird, because you'd think if more is going on, you'd remember it more. But no, it's the more grounded personal stories you remember more, which is why Dark Knight is a much more memorable film.
And I think another issue with this one is, as much as I thought they tried to cram a lot into the last one, This one especially so. The number
my
of
God.
characters that they introduce.
is in it,
Catwoman.
and like she's like a big character, but she's not even in it that much.
Right.
She like shows up every now and again, and then she teams up with Batman at the end, just kind of because.
But I do like Anne Hathaway's portrayal as Catwoman.
Yeah, her Catwoman performance is awesome.
And I go back to the so quickly. Actually, that really is where I connect Christian Bale to Bruce Wayne, because there are multiple scenes where he is just Bruce Wayne in this one and having interactions with Anne Hathaway as not Catwoman. And those are the scenes where I feel like, to me, the reason why I feel like I did not necessarily enjoy Christian Bale's portrayal of Bruce Wayne, the character.
And that's what I was saying earlier, is I agree with you when we get to this film, because there's too much of him now. And oh my God, it's like you get the whole scene where he has to climb out of the pit, which is okay, but it's like it's paced weird and it's spaced out way too much in the course of that section of the film, where it's like sometimes you cut back to it and you're like, oh yeah, Bruce Wayne's in a pit. I forgot, because like they just stay away from it for so long. There's not a lot of Batman stuff in this movie, which, considering that this movie is really going for the action. Like, this is an action film. This is no longer a thriller. This is no longer has any elements of crime drama. It's just a straight up action film. And there's like the least amount of Batman, which is kind of a shame. But there's the new character, Robin, which you don't find out till the end. I don't know what the hell they were doing with that. Did they want to do another one? I don't even think so. But whatever the case, Robin's there, and you don't know he's Robin until the end, because of course that has to be a twist, which is just kind of confusing, because then you don't know the guy's name, but he's like a main character. It's kind of weird, but I liked him in it as like the detective. He was cool. And since Lieutenant Gordon was kind of Commissioner Gordon was kind of out of the picture for a decent amount of the, or no, he's a lieutenant by this point. He was kind of out of the picture for a lot of the film, because he's like in the hospital. It was good to have a new charismatic guy come in, and he was fine.
Yeah, I like Joseph Gordon-Levitt here as the character that becomes Robin, I guess. And, thinking about that, I like that it was kind of, I don't think anyone expected that there was another one. I feel like at this point, it was very well known that this was it. And so just that you kind of have this throwaway, like, oh, guess what? He's going to go become Robin. I thought it was kind of fun. It's fun in the sense of, it's like, okay, you don't have to expect another one to happen. You know that this is a living, breathing world that continues without us, the viewer. It
tells you that and also Christian or Bruce Wayne still being alive after he just made the sacrifice and nuked himself. Okay, so I have a lot of problems with that. First of all, why not just kill him? Just let him die. Let him fucking die. Okay. We made this bit. He completed his character arc in that moment, and you screwed it up by having him still be alive. Now, on the flip side, it doesn't do a terrible job. I wasn't like yelling at my screen when he was still alive, because it calls back to an earlier scene where Alfred said he wanted to see him across the table with a wife having a life. And what he meant by this was he did not want Batman to continue. He wanted Bruce Wayne to be Bruce Wayne. And so in that sense, his arc does kind of complete, because this tells us that he probably is just going to be Bruce Wayne. Although, because Robin is Robin, that isn't actually the case, and he's going to go back to being Batman. It's a lot. And I don't think that was necessary. I would have preferred him to just die, which maybe would have pissed off the comic fans, but it would have been better as a film choice, as a choice to end the trilogy. And yeah, Alfred in this film, he leaves, and I enjoyed Alfred finally having a real character drama to Alfred. That was enjoyable. And some of the action scenes were fun, but this movie went for that fun aspect more than the other ones did, and it was tonally confused on its own, because it was still part of that trilogy, and as a result, you still have all the leftovers from that trilogy, and all of the super serious stuff that those trilogies did is still in this movie, but there's like more not silly stuff. So when you get to the sillier stuff, it just seems especially silly, because now it's really silly stuff and really serious stuff meshed up together in a way that really doesn't work.
Yeah. And we didn't mention it, but the other callback here in this one is Talia al Ghul shows up as well.
Yeah, because
becomes kind of the villain.
That's the way that this completes the arc of the trilogy, is that the League of Shadows comes back, because Joker was not a member of the League of Shadows, whereas Bane is. And so the League of Shadows is now a thing again, and they're finally going to do their plot to destroy Gotham, and Batman has to save everyone and all that. And the League of Shadows stuff was what I liked the least about Batman Begins. I preferred the more grounded, there's just a criminal that Batman is going to take down this time. That's what Dark Knight did so well, and this movie is like Bane is a super villain. Nobody else in the series, even not even Ra's al Ghul. But Bane is like, he is just a straight up supervillain, and that's what's just kind of dumb. And I didn't really like him. He was just stupid, and I laughed. I mean, yeah, I laughed at Batman sometimes, not really in Dark Knight, but in Batman Begins, I laughed a few times. But like here, it's like I was fine with that. He still was like, I still enjoyed him, and I still thought that he worked. But like Bane was just kind of funny. I didn't take him seriously at all. Yeah, so, you know, this movie just felt, I guess the best way to put it is it felt way more generic than the other two did. This is a generic spectacle, faux disaster movie action film where everything is going to go wrong until it doesn't. And those movies, they just get on the ridiculous side for me. They get on the less memorable side for me, you know? And I'll take the spoiler tag down. I guess we're done with that. We'll wrap it up. But like for me, I'm going to give this movie... I initially was going to say 6, and now I'm going to say 5, so I'll just cut it in between and say 5.5. How about that, you know? I'm like ever so slightly on the more positive end for this one, but just barely. Like this is pretty average. At times just downright stupid and funny. Like the opening scene, I mean, yeah, Bane posting hasn't helped, but Bane posting became a thing because that scene was fucking dumb. For you, it would be extremely painful. And I'm like, I don't even know what the other guy says, but he cuts him off, and then Bane still says, for you. It was like, what the fuck? Yeah, that was dumb. They're in a plane, and it just... Yeah. I mean, every single thing compared to the opening scene, not nearly as good as the opening scene of Dark Knight. Villain, not nearly as good. And so, especially as a part of this trilogy, it's especially weak. And I'll let you...
Yeah, and I would probably give it about a 7.
So you liked it?
I liked it, yeah. But again, I haven't. Just like you, I watched it in the theaters. I liked it in the theaters. I would be interested to see going back on it now how I would feel about it. But I felt like it didn't live up to the second movie. I think it was hard to do so.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that.
And so I think that really hurt this film in general. But I think that it didn't live up to the second film in such a way where, like you mentioned, there were some pretty ridiculous elements of this one. Just in general, Bane's voice was, it was like, who could do the sillier voice, Bane or Christian Bale?
I'm Bane. Batman. Stupid. Yeah, no thanks. But trilogy overall, the Dark Knight trilogy, Dark Knight is better than Batman Begins, is better than this. I don't think this is a good trilogy. I think this is an extremely disjointed trilogy. Not even talking about the quality of the films themselves, but like as a trilogy, again, because Dark Knight is such a standalone movie, it's like Batman Begins is part of a trilogy, Dark Knight Rises is part of a trilogy, and then Dark Knight is a movie. And that's just kind of weird. Now, sure, that worked in Dark Knight's favor, but for the Batman Nolan trilogy, it really didn't. As a result, you've got a trilogy that feels awkward, kind of haphazard, like they were making it up as they went along, especially because the League of Shadows was just not even really a thing in the second movie. And so as a result, Dark Knight Rises has to wrap it all up, and it's not I didn't think it was a good film. And, you know, it's important that the third film wraps it all up in a satisfying way, even if oftentimes the third films fall into a slump, but even if it does, it should still feel like, man, this was a great conclusion. And this wasn't, because, you know, if Batman died, maybe, but because he didn't die, it was kind of just like whatever. Like, and again, it didn't even conclude because it left it open, even though it knew it was the last film. I understand why it did that, but as an ending to a trilogy, no. It's just, I would never sit down and watch the Nolan Batman trilogy. I would watch Dark Knight. That's it. Because if I watch Batman Begins, you got to watch the other two. And if you watch Dark Knight Rises, it's fucking 3 hours long, and it's just dumb. And it's just whatever. So if I had to score the trilogy, maybe like a 5. And that's a lower score than any of the movies themselves, but that's just because as a trilogy, this does not hold up. It only holds up as one really fantastic movie and then 2 other ones, and whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if I can score the trilogy again just based on I haven't seen it in a long time, but I do agree. This is a trilogy only in that it's 3 films made by a director, not that it is
with recurring characters.
With recurring characters, not that it is something that completes or wraps up or really even has a through line through the whole thing. So
yeah, and I think we can end it with that. So, let's get into, I guess, my recommendation first, because I recommend it to you. So I'm recommending Norm of the North. That's all I need to say. I know that this is a 2016 animated film, and it's called Norm of the North.
Lewis and I are in the same room right now, so Lewis got a good face.
I'm very happy because I've been waiting on this one, and I thought now's the right time. It's a film. That's all I'm gonna really say about it. Besides that, all right.
Okay, and so for my recommendation, I'm going to recommend to you a YouTube channel. This is a YouTube channel called The Completionist. And so what it is it is a guy who does game reviews. His name is Gerard, but he does game reviews in so much as he will take a game and complete it. So to 100% completion. So I would say for the way that I would recommend this is I would just select a handful of them and kind of watch through. They're only about 20 to 30 minutes each. I would definitely watch the one on Sonic Boom as probably not the first one you would watch, but as one of them that you would watch. And so, yeah, I think it started in about 2011. And he's been doing it since 2011. The format's changed a couple times as he's going through. So he has like quote unquote seasons, only in that the intro to the thing changes. But in general, the through line is, again, it's a game review, but a game review specifically in like, how is it as a 100% completion item?
Right. Yeah. Okay. And I don't have the other title card. I don't even really need it, but I do it every time, so I'm going to bring that up here. And I guess that's pretty much it. So when we get back to you next time, we've got Norm of the North and The Completionist. Truly our greatest lineup?
Yes.
Undoubtedly. All right, so do you want to outro us?
Yeah, so with that, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.